Hi, I'm Jeff Cross.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lee.
And I'm on the Angular team, and Tracy is...
I take selfies of people.
Tracy is a selfie taker.
Taker of selfies. I run Modern Web.
Thank you for coming tonight. We've got a fun night and some cool talks planned. Tracy has some announcements.
Yes. So thanks all for coming. If you guys aren't familiar with Modern Web, we do a lot of really cool events related to all different types of frameworks. JavaScript, yeah, that thing. Anyways, so we're excited to partner with the Angular team today. There's going to be a lot of really fun, exciting games. And we're doing another event August 23rd, partnering with you guys as well, and another JavaScript meetup. So you'll get to hear from PatrickJS, talk about Webpack, really advanced Webpack stuff, GraphQL from Sam Rabuna, and then Steven from your team as well is going to be talking. Then in September, React Router v4 with Michael Jackson, RX with React and Redux with Jay Phelps, who's right over there, and then React Components with Morris Julian. So I hope you guys all get to come check those out.
Tonight's lineup, we've got a talk with Scott Moss, which wasn't announced, but we're really excited that he was driving down and someone else had to back down, and we said, can you give a talk? And he said yes. So go easy on him if he messes up his talk, which I'm sure he will.
YOLO.
I'm just kidding. He'll nail it. And then we've got some games, and then PatrickJS. His name is misspelled on here, but it's actually PatrickJS, and he's going to give a talk. And then another game and a lightning talk from Dvid Silva. And then we're going to have a panel where people can ask questions from people on the core team and people who gave talks tonight, and then just hanging out. And usually Brad has some announcements to give here, but I forgot to work with him to get that, and he's not here tonight. So Angular people, what announcements do we have for Angular since the last meetup? Rob, you're dev advocate, so you should have this ready. We released RC4.
RC5 is soon. We have Angular Connect coming up soon. NG Europe also coming up soon.
Lots of conferences.
My counterpart Steven will be talking at the SF meetup. When is that? Do you know when the SF is? So there's another meetup, SF. You should go to that.
Kara's not here. But...
yeah, that's it. We're working hard. Angular's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the party.
Angular.io is the place to go to see all the conferences and stuff coming up. And
I hear Victor has some blog posts that are coming up soon.
Victor's blog is now hotter than ever. Follow Victor on Twitter and Rob on Twitter. They tweet about Angular all the time. So Tracy, you got a couple more things?
Yeah, so we also do this podcast with Modern Web, so you can go to modern-web.org. We just released 2 of them. One is about D3 and Ember and composable helpers, so it's actually kind of interesting to listen to how other things like D3 are implemented in Ember. And then also React and sort of the evolution of the React community.
We'll talk about Ember React here.
Yeah? It's kind of exciting. You're React and Ember curious though, right?
I guess so.
A little bit? Okay. Yeah, so check it out.
Oops. So now we're going to ask our friend Scott Moss to come up and stumble through his talk. Let's give him a hand.
All right, so I'm Scott Moss, co-creator of Angular class along with my homie PJS over there, or PatrickJS. We do a lot of Angular stuff around the webs. You probably use our Webpack starter or stuff like that. So I came down with Patrick today to hear his talk, and then found out that our other friend Aisha wasn't able to make it, so they put me on the spot and asked me to give a talk. So I'm going to give a talk today. So lately I've been doing a lot of stuff with testing with Angular 2. That's kind of fresh on my mind, and I haven't seen a lot of resources out there, so I decided let's walk through testing a component using Angular 2. Who here has done that before? Literally the Angular team and the Ionic team, yeah. So almost nobody. Okay, so this should be pretty helpful. Let's just get to it then. So I already have some app running here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I have running. We'll walk through some of that code, and then we're going to just test that stuff. So let's just bring up what I have running here to the other screen. Here we go. So this is actually part of some curriculum that we're making. This is just like an app. It's like a remake of Google Keep. It's called Retain. We're doing this for some of the curriculum that we'll be teaching. And basically, what we're going to be testing is not this awesome component right here that you're like typing some stuff in. This is like a note-taking app, like I said, Google Keep, and you can like pick a color, and you hit done, and then it creates a note. So we're gonna write tests for this component right here, and testing the state and all the functionality of what's happening here. And like I said, all this is already written out. So what we're gonna do is let's just hop back into the code here and juggling 2 screens. There we go. I can't even see that font from there. Oh man, that's so hard. Okay, there it is. Is that too big? Yeah. Okay, just right. All right, let's bring it down a little bit. Cool, there we go. All right, so here's the actual code for that component. Let's just take a tour. We don't need some of this context as we develop the specs for it. So basically, we have some styles here. Let's get to the interesting part. We have this template, and what we're doing here, we're just toggling some state off some events, mouse enter, mouse leave. We'll get to that in a little bit. And we're just binding to some properties. So that's basically it. And then we also have this ng if that we're toggling on a click. So if we come down here, some of the things that we actually want to test, we want to test to make sure that the note is being passed in is correct. We also want to test when this toggle checks, so when it's clicked, that this property is also actually being set, and the appropriate div that's being set on this ngIf is going to be in the DOM, so we can test DOM things. So we're going to pretty much test all that stuff. So we can just go ahead and jump right into it. I just want to jump into the testing and not so much focus on the component itself, because that's not the interesting part. There's lots of tutorials out there that talk about this stuff, but not so much about the testing. Okay, so who here has written tests with Jasmine? Yeah. What about along with Karma? Yeah, okay. Okay, so if you haven't used Karma before, some of this might be over your head a little bit, but trust me, it's not that difficult. I already did the setup for it, so we're just gonna walk through some of that, and then we'll write the actual test. So the first thing you need to do is let's actually look at the dependencies we need to write some tests in the current state of Angular 2. All this is subject to change, okay? As of right now, this works, okay? It might not work 10 minutes from now because Rob's on his computer. Yeah, timestamp this right now on the video. Right now it works. So using RC4, let's go down to the dev dependencies. So some of the stuff we're gonna need, Jasmine Core, Karma. I'm running this on Chrome. Karma Jasmine. I like the Mocha reporter, so I'm using that. And then some of the other necessary stuff we're gonna need is Webpack. We're gonna need, well, you don't need Webpack, we need some type of bundler. In this case, I'm using Webpack. I'm also using Webpack version 2, which is written in TypeScript, so I'll have some other stuff here written. And of course you need TypeScript, but that's an Angular dependency and not so much of a testing dependency. So once we have all that, you run through and you create your Karma file. Let's just take a look at that. So our Karma conf is actually pretty simple. There's actually 2 ways I've seen like people testing like their bundled applications. What they would do is, I've seen most people use like the Webpack, Karma Webpack plugin. It hasn't been updated in like 2 years. So I just don't use it anymore. And it just didn't work for some of the stuff that I did. So what I decided to do, the approach that I did was, why not just build the application, the spec files, the same way you would build the application, right? You would bundle your application through some bundler and you would serve it through the browser. That's the same thing that's happening with the specs. You're gonna bundle your specs, you're gonna serve it to the browser through Karma. So that's what I did. I bundled it myself and then grabbed that file and pass it over to Karma to load up through Chrome or whatever. So that means all I have to do is just pass Karma the eventual bundled file. In this case, the file that's gonna be built by Webpack is just gonna be called spec.js. So that's the files here. Frameworks has to be Jasmine here. Angular 2 is gonna be using Jasmine for testing. And the other interesting stuff here is, actually that's it. There's really no other interesting stuff here. It's that simple. We're just passing in one file here. That's gonna be the eventual bundled file, right? This is gonna be the combination of all the specs that we written into one file. That's the file that we're gonna serve to Karma. That's all we're doing here. Nothing special. Whatever reporters or whatever you want to use, plugins, preprocessors, you can totally use that. But as far as getting this working, that's pretty much all we need right there. Like I said, there's another approach with Karma Webpack. It's a little more complicated, but I steered away from it because it hasn't been updated in a while and I was kind of scared of it. So didn't do that. Sweet. So what we need to do now is we actually need to create a Webpack file to bundle our actual specs. So if we go look, I actually created one here. I think that's the right one. I can't see the file name from all the way over here. I think that's it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's it, spec.ts. So yeah, so here's the Webpack file. It's pretty much the same as our regular Webpack file for our app, except for the entries just changed. So we just need a different entry into this. So you can think about it like this. We have two separate applications, right? We have our application that we're building that I just showed you in the browser, and then this other application, which is really just a tree of all the specs that we're making. So we just got to give an entry file to that. And the entry file in this case is a file that I made called spec.entry.ts. And we're going to look at that file in a second. But everything else is the same. It has the same loaders. Pretty much everything else is the same. Again, this is written in TypeScript, although I'm not using any type stuff here. Actually, yeah, this is Webpack 2.0, because if I had 1.0, I had to put a string there and it'll break. But anyway, yeah, the only thing difference is entry, is I'm entering to spec, so the spec.entry.ts. So nothing exciting there. Now let's head over to this one. This is where it kind of gets, oh, don't open that up, please. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is where it kind of gets crazy. So we're doing a lot of stuff in here. A lot of this, you know, maybe unnecessary, maybe opinionated, but I'm bringing it in anyway. So just like the polyfills we need when we're running Angular 2 app, we're gonna need those same polyfills when we're testing it because, right, we're testing Angular 2 applications in the browser through Karma, so we need the same polyfills, right? So we load those polyfills up. Core.js is Core.js. It has all the stuff like Reflex and ES6 stuff, so we load that stuff up. TS helpers, you don't really need that. And then here's all the Zone.js stuff. We're just going in. And the reason we dig into it like this with dist is because actually I think it will throw an error because TypeScript is thinking you're trying to load a JS file, but the actual package name is called zone.js, so it kind of freaks out. So I'm just diving in. 2.0 fixes that, thank God. Yeah, so as of like right now, which is like 1.8 something, it's gonna break. So I'm just digging into the dist there. And then some of the RxJS stuff that I use inside of my application. So pretty much the same stuff you would have loaded up if you were making an Angular application in the first place. And then let's get to the testing specific stuff. So right now, Angular comes with some testing providers for core and platform browser. So we're just going to import all of those, and we're just going to load them up to this thing called set base test providers, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a very explicit function name, set base test providers. And in fact, actually, don't quote me on this, but I think this is deprecated now. Am I right, Jeff? Do you know at the top of your head? I'm pretty sure that's deprecated. Yes, yeah, it is. It's it will be, okay, yeah. It's pre-deprecated, but it works for now, so. So basically all we're doing is we're adding all the providers, you know, the services and mocks, setting it up for our testing. And then basically we come down here, and because we're using Webpack, we get this nice method called context. And the reason I did bracket syntax, again, because it'll break with TypeScript, because I don't have a definition file, and I should have written one. But anyway, it's just running this require.context method. And really what this is saying is go into the source folder recursively, which is true, and find any file that matches this pattern. So that's what that's saying. Go into the source folder recursively, finding any file that matches this pattern, and it's going to require that file in this file. So it's going to bundle any file that matches here right underneath here. So this is where we're actually requiring it. This is where it's going to require those files. And this is going to bundle it all right down here. So all of our specs are going to be in one file. Remember, so this file is spec.entry.ts. If we go back to our Karma config, if we go look at the entry, oh, actually, I'm sorry, I messed up. Specs.js, the output file is specs.js. So it's going to bundle that file, then Webpack's going to spit out an output of specs.js. So our entry file is a file that we start our specs into. It's going to gather all the other specs that we wrote in the source folder. Webpack's going to build it all and output this other file called specs.js. So that's going to be the output, just like if you had a bundle.js that you output it from Webpack. So that's the walkthrough of setting up the tests. Any questions on that? It's dead silent out there. It's like it's being in the ocean at dark. All right, let's actually get into writing some tests. So let's head into app. Let me see. We'll go into UI. And then here we go. Here's where we're going to write the specs for the Notecard. So let's just go ahead and do this. So the first thing we need to do actually is we need to import a smorgasbord of things from Angular. So we're going to import what we need. We need inject. We also are going to need describe, expect, Let's see what else. Before each, does that pop up there? Oh, there we go. Before. No, I think we need before each. So we'll do before each. We're also going to need async and it. So if you've ever used Karma, if you ever use Jasmine or Mocha, you know some of these, you're already like familiar with some of these terms. Describe, before each, it. And we're importing this stuff from Angular core / testing. So Angular is not, did somebody say it was deprecated? Is that what somebody just said? It's, oh my God. Okay. Yeah, it's already, yeah, I was just about to say that. I was like, so this stuff is already in Jasmine, but we have it here for now, I guess to help with, you fixed it, okay. All right, so there was a glitch and they fixed it, so yeah, we don't need it anymore, that's the good news, right?
It means Java or tab or whatever else you test.
Nice, super awesome. So you're not stuck to Jasmine anymore like we used to be. Awesome. But for now, in this context, as of right now, in this repo, we're stuck in Jasmine with this, okay? Most of this stuff is going to transition over to whatever framework you use anyway. So it's neither here nor there. The actual framework Jasmine itself is little to do with what I'm going to be teaching you about testing a component. So that's just an implementation detail. Okay, cool. So now let's get into the fun stuff. What we need to do now is, the strategy is what we want to do to test this component is we want to create a mock component that's going to wrap our component that we want to test. And then therefore we can query that mock component. We can pass stuff in through the inputs, and then we can wait for the change detection to happen or trigger the change detection, and then expect and detect the output from there. And that's the strategy that we're going to go through testing this component. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and import test component builder. That's deprecated. Okay. I'm about to say, God, what are you guys doing? We also need component fixture. And that's going to come from Angular compiler testing. Test component builder. Oh, there it is. I put testing. There we go. And it's going to be testing. There we go. So we're going to import that stuff. And these two are pretty much the test component builder is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to help us build a test component. And the component fixture is just going to be like a reference to the actual instance of that component that we can use to test. It's just a fixture. Cool. And then we also want to go ahead and import, because we're going to be making a component, we need to go ahead and import components from Angular core. It's really hard to type at this angle because I'm like super tall. There we go. And we want to get the component. There we go. And then one more thing we need to import is the actual component that we're going to be testing itself, which is going to be at Notecard. Let's just go ahead and get some help from TypeScript here. And where is that at? Oh, it's right next to it in this tree here. There we go. So we'll get the Notecard. What? There we go. Sweet. All right, so now we have that. What we need to do now is actually make the test component that we want to make. So we'll just say at component, and we'll give it a selector of test. There's this crazy bug in Sublime that thing pops up, and sometimes it's really hard to go away. It's really annoying. Somebody opened an issue 8 days ago, and I'm like about to fix it because it's really annoying. Okay, and then for directives, we need to go ahead and pass in our directive, the Notecard. So just like you would pass in the directive to any other component in your app, we're doing the same thing for this test component. So we got the directives, Notecard, and then we need to make a template, which is just going to be a basic template that literally just renders the selector for our Notecard, which is Notecard. Yeah, so yeah, I have syntax highlighting for my stuff because I'm using this modified Angular 2 syntax that I hacked a couple days ago. I'll be sure to share it, I promise. Sweet, so that's just going to, we're just going to put that on the class. We'll call it test component. Oh my God, it's really hard to say. There we go. And then we just need to go ahead and we can go ahead and start like declaring some of our mocks. we know that the note card actually takes in an input here, and the input that it wants is going to be binding to the note property. So we can do that, and we're going to set it equal to a note that we haven't made yet. So we're going to come down here, and we're just going to make a mock note. So not this. We'll just say note equals, and we'll just give it a title of hello. There we go. And we'll give it a value of this is my note, and we'll give it a color too of red. There we go. So now we have our note. We have it passed in here. We have our component made. Now we can actually go ahead and actually start like writing some tests. So what we want to do now is set up our first describe block. So we'll say describe note card. Come here. There we go. And what we need to do is we need to go ahead and we need to get an instance of the test component builder, which is like, we have to invoke it and grab a reference to it. So what we need to do is we need to set up a before each. So we'll say before each. And what we want to do before each is we want to inject the test component builder here. And then we are going to get a reference to, or the instance for that test component. So I'm just going to call it TCB for short, and its type is going to be test component builder. There we go. And I'm just going to go ahead and save that to, let's just save that to, let's make a variable up here. We'll call it let builder equals nothing right now, but we'll give it a type so we can get some nice syntax highlighting, or I'm sorry, some nice support tests, component builder. There we go. And all we have to do now is say builder equals TCB. So what I'm doing here is I'm injecting the test component builder. I'm getting the instance of it, and I'm just saving it outside to this variable up top, builder. So that way I can use it outside the closure, inside of my assertions. So I just need a reference to this. Otherwise, I have to do this every single time. So I'm just gonna do it once, save it up here so I can reference it down below. So let's actually go ahead and write a test. Let's say let's just make sure it has the right title in the DOM. We passed in a title on this note. We know the note card takes in a note. Let's make sure it actually puts the right title in the DOM. So that's what we'll do. It should have correct title. Correct. Does that look weird? Oh, guess not. Okay, there we go. But we actually have to create an instance of the test component. We have the test component builder, but we need an instance of it, and that's an asynchronous action. So we got this really awesome method that we get called async. It's just a different way to handle async testing inside of Jasmine in this case. But you can also do things like you can return an observable, return a promise. But we're just going to use the async wrapper here. And this is just going to take a callback with the async function that you want to run. In this case, what we want to do is we want to run builder.create async. Oh, I misspelled async. There we go. Asynchronous. There we go. So async. So we want to builder.create async, and what we want to create is the test component that we declared up top. So we want to create that test component. That's going to return a promise. And what we want to do is get a reference to the fixture here. And that fixture is going to be the type of component fixture. And it's going to take in a generic, and that's just going to be, probably already guessed, test component. There we go. So now we have that. Oops. I just like stuck it in there. It's like really messed up. It needs to be a callback here. Oh, come here. Oh, I can't really see. There we go. Okay, mouse time. There we go. And we need a callback right here. Cool. Sweet. All right, so we got that. And then what we want to do is now that we have a reference to that fixture is actually just going to be this component right here. So now we have a reference to that. What we can do is we can start doing all types of testing stuff that we want to do, all types of DOM things. So let's just go ahead and run this callback. And what we're going to say is, I got an extra callback? Oh, yeah. What would you say? Oh, dang, I didn't even see that comment. Sorry. Yeah, I need my glasses like really bad. I can't really see anything. Okay, there we go. Wait, no. Yeah, I need the parentheses, both of them. Yeah. And there. Cool. All right. So now what we want to do is we have that fixture. Let's actually get the title. So we'll say const title equals fixture. Oh my God. It's really hard to type at this angle. Native element. So we'll get the native element, which is the native DOM element right here. And we can go ahead and do a query selector on this. Thank you. 1 minute. There we go. We get a query selector here. And what we want to do, that's misspelled. We want to go ahead and let's just look, see where that title is. Notecard. The title is, it has a title class. So we can use that. Let's use the title class. Head back over. We'll come down here. Query selector is going to be dot title or title. There we go. So now we have the title. And then what we want to do is we can go ahead and you would think that we can go ahead and make an assertion here, like expect this title to equal hello. But because we passed that note in up here, we have to trigger a change detection inside Angular to let the framework know that some changes happen, that we actually pass some data in. So the next thing we want to do is we can actually get a reference to that. We can say fixture dot detect changes. And this is going to say, hey, I changed something, go fix yourself. And that's basically what it's going to do. It's like, okay, we noticed some data change, let's re-render and get this figured away. So now that that has changed, everything's good to go. What we can do now is we can just go ahead and write our assertion. So expect title dot, and we can get this is a regular DOM node right now, title is. So we can get the text content here. We'll get the text content, we should trim it just to make sure that it doesn't have regular spaces in it. And we'll expect that to equal to, how you do this in Jasmine? Is that Jasmine? Equal? Yeah, okay, yeah. We'll expect that to equal, what is the title up here? Hello. Oh, yeah. That's not how you do that. There we go.
You also need to put the test component outside of the
I put it inside the decorator?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Look at that. Nobody even caught that. Good eye. He's like, yeah, I do this all the time. Don't worry about it. There you go. Sweet. I'm surprised it didn't blow up. Like TypeScript didn't even, TypeScript, like, you saw some underlines? I was like, TypeScript liked it, so I was like, this is actually really cool. I like this. It didn't want to embarrass me. Okay, so we expect that to equal hello, which is hello. All right, so hopefully this works. Let's run it and find out. Let me bring my console up there, my terminal. Let me blow this up. So I got all this already set up, and I got it set up to just run NPM Test, which is, actually, let's just go look at it. So it's, there's no mystery. Look at the package.json. NPM Test, what it does is first, it calls Webpack, passes in that Webpack spec config with these arguments, and then it waits till it's done building, and then it's just going to run Karma start. So that means that bundled file is guaranteed there before we run with Karma. So that's what that's doing here. So I'm just going to run npm start, which is just going to handle that for us. npm start. Oh, okay. Nope. That didn't. Oh, I'm already using the port somewhere. Sweet. That's a good error. I like those errors. Let's run it again. Oh, I'm sorry. npm test. There we go. So we're on npm test, and you can see it's building right now with Webpack. That's a good sign. So it's bundling that file for us that we declared. It's going to build everything. And once that file is built, it's going to run Karma start, which it freaked out because it couldn't find name expect. It's not imported. Yep, I totally forgot to import it, which makes sense. Yeah, so we need to import expect here. There we go. So we got expect. No, not here. Yeah, it's already good to go. It should be good to go there. The spec entry. And then we'll just run NPM tests. And it's building again. And hopefully this time we'll get a passing test or a ran test. Oh, OK, so it built fine. Chrome is launching behind this. And there we go. So I had some other tests on there that I wrote, but ours was right here. The Notecard should have correct title. So you could imagine if we just go back, just to get the juices flowing and the imagination going, because we have a reference to the actual native DOM element here. I mean, you could do. I was telling Patrick the other day, I was like, this is it. This is the only time I would ever use jQuery in Angular. It's like I would just do jQuery things or to detect properties and attributes and stuff like that. But yeah, you can do, this is the DOM way to test components. There's another way to test components, like the actual class itself. And that's actually pretty straightforward. You just initialize a new component. That's not too interesting. This part, though, you can imagine we can do all types of things. We can check for things in the DOM. We can you know, trigger custom events like mouse over, mouse enter, click, and calls. And then we can detect changes, and we can see what happens when we do that. So there's a lot of stuff we can do here. This is just a basic example. And that's testing components with Angular 2.
I'm here to talk to you about Angular Universal and how static and dynamic websites live in that kind of world of universal JavaScript, right? So this is the comparison of static websites and dynamic websites and how it entails with universal applications. Cool. All right, so the first thing we're going to go over is static websites. Now, what is a static website? We've all been there in the 90s, right? Jeff knows what a static website is. We've all been on Wikipedia. We've all been clicking on all these links and going down and looking at all the different types of Pokemon there are. And one thing that we need to know about static websites is that you can't make Wikipedia a single-page app. It actually doesn't make that much sense to load all of Wikipedia onto your computer. Well, some might want to do that, but some might not. But the idea here is that content is king. For Wikipedia, which is largely a static site, you really go here just for the content. You go here so you can read something and you can stay informed by the content. You want to see like what type of Pokemon you have or whatever, right? So that's kind of why we still have static websites in the dynamic world, is that they're short-lived. That is to say that you go on Wikipedia, you find your information, then you close it, or you find your Pokemon type, and you find what the weaknesses is, and then you close it, right? So now I'm going to show you that static website. So if I could zoom in here. So this is essentially a static website. If I refresh, we could see that it's loading in 5 milliseconds. And I have an input here. If I type in something and hit enter, it's going to refresh the page. Probably can't see that unless you're throttling. Turn off that Google Fiber. Yeah, see there's a whole page refresh whenever I hit enter here. And again, like, so I'm going to show you that I quickly built a static site generator using Universal and Angular. So this is just Webpack, and this is like a prototype I built in 5 minutes. But essentially what it does is it reads your Angular routes here, and it converts them into how you would structure a static website. And if you're not familiar with that, that's simply just a public folder where you create folders for your particular like links and corresponding links, and then index pages there, right? So if we zoom back out and you click here, you can see that it works because it's going to the corresponding folder and loading that particular index folder, file. So you can see that we have a regular Angular application here, which has like a parent, some basic components with a router outlet, and a basic like component hierarchy. that is being correctly rendered in this particular plugin. So you can see that we are correctly rendering our folder structure. And this is how we could essentially use Universal to generate statically our Angular applications if you wanted to, right? And the next thing we need to know is dynamic applications. So we live in a world now where we want to have highly interactive web applications, right? Where you open up your phone and you click on something like Twitter, and you're able to click around and see your tweets, right? The goal here, the focus is interaction, or time to interact and do something inside of the application, right? So it's more of an experience, right, or a Gmail. But the downside is that you're brought with a loading screen, right? So in this particular app, Google Music, when you go to it, it's actually loading for a second, and then you're brought with the application. But that's okay because it's a long-lived application. You're going to load it once, and that is it, right? So I'm going to demonstrate that over here. Well, this is, let's see here. R1. So this is now our universal application right here, being generated on the server. And it is now loading our index file, or JavaScript here. So just, let's see. So we have a basic server here, and we are running Universal on the server, and we're pre-rendering it here. And then when we hit the URL, we are now brought with that particular page or our application, right? So rather than waiting for a loading screen or waiting for the application to bootstrap, we're brought with an initial load of their particular application, and we're able to see and interact with it right away. Right. So I could type here and then click on bootstrap our application and see that now it's actually working correctly. You can see the data binding working here. Right. So with Universal, we can actually combine these two worlds simply by combining both of these two features by statically pre-rendering the index page and then dynamically bootstrapping the client-side application. So let me show you that, and then I'll quickly go over what's going on. So the way we bootstrap our application on the server is with this configuration file. And we simply provide our application here in our directives, as well as any sort of providers here. And we have our application, which is universal, that lives in this particular folder. And this is simply just like setting our two-way data binding or inputs right here. And rather than providing the app itself with the index.html that's static right here, rather than that, we could actually provide an HTML component here that is actually importing our application. So now this component, which is an HTML component, only lives on the server. And when we pre-render this particular component, it's going to pre-render the whole application, including itself. And then we're going to send down the bundled file of the client component, which is just the app here. And that's going to bootstrap on client. So this is where we could separate any sort of dynamic behavior or dynamic components only on the server here, and still maintain like any sort of dynamic widgets on the page after we send it down. So you can see here on our server only component, which is our HTML component, we're creating a component that has some routes that basically says like, that that generates links depending on our actual Angular application routes. And it is also providing an empty element here. So let's put that back down there. So if I refresh, depending on which server I'm on, not that one, there it is. We can see that our nav bar here, which lived in this component, is now generated up top. And below it is our universal application. And we're able to click on any of these links here that was generated statically from the server to then change the way the page. So like outside of the framework, notice how it's refreshing the page. So say that if you have any sort of different line of business, like this is the community section, and this is like the support section, you could see this as being able to switch to different types of lines of businesses and being able to have that separation of particular pages. So this is one way of doing that. And then you can see that we're able to, well, let me actually turn back the single page app. We're able to utilize the single page app for this particular page, which could also be dynamic for depending on which line of business you're working on. So refresh again. Reach out to clients. We can see that in this particular home, we are able to switch between two different pages inside of this single page app, which lives inside of this pre-rendered index.html. And then we click here again. Again, this is a full render of the whole application on the server. We reach out to clients, and then we can switch around. So Universal allows us to essentially pre-render all of our components in a recursive fashion. So we could dynamically generate the index page however we want using Angular 2 itself. So no more Jade, no more Haml or whatever, unless you like that, it's fine too. But it allows us to stick with one paradigm, one technology to generate these kind of pages, as well as allows us to have separation for different lines of businesses. So you can have multiple teams isolated in their own like Angular application, and you don't need to worry about what they're doing, and the user just needs to click on that particular route. So yeah, so that's basically being able to combine the two worlds with Angular Universal.
Hi, my name is David. I'm gonna give you a, I'm the founder of the Latinos in Tech meetup at GDU Berkeley. I contribute to the Bauer documentation, and we're working on a project to translate the Angular.io website into Spanish. And I'm talking today about transforms on Angular 1. This is, I wanted to talk about transfers because I've been using them a while. We use them a lot in where I work at, but I see very little information about them online, very few questions about them on Stack Overflow. Sometimes when we want to do stuff, it's really hard to find it. When I've been recruiting candidates, a lot of people don't know what they are. So maybe you do all what they are, but I feel that a lot of people don't. So hopefully, if you haven't used them yet, it will spark your curiosity and you can try them on your next project. So what are transforms? When you're calling the HTTP service, you can pass two properties called transformRequest or transformResponse that are functions. You can pass a function or an array of functions that modify the data that you're sending or receiving. There are already transfers like built-in Angular. There's two default transfers that happen every time you make a request with HTTP. This is the source code for the default transform request. Basically turns your objects into a string that you can send to a server. This default transform response gets a JSON string from the server and turns it into an object that you can use in your application. Again, transforms can be super simple functions, or they can be as complicated as you want. Why do we use a lot of transforms in our company? I think it's a way to make reusable functions that you can use across all your services for several reasons. You can add access tokens to all your requests. You can debug your requests and see what's happening and what is being called. You can add sensitive defaults to your requests, sanitize data, make sure that stuff are what they're supposed to be, throw errors if the responses or the requests are malformed. Example things that we do at the company where I work at, we have 4 types of users that use similar APIs, but the parameters that we pass to the functions are all different for depending on the type of user. So we use a lot of transforms to change, like if a medical doctor is making a request, we might call that parameter in a certain way, but if a psychologist is making the request, we call it in a different way. So it's very useful for that. Another thing that we use, we have like this cute loading bar on top of our screen. So I use the transform request to know when a request is happening, and I activate the loading bar, and when a request is done, I can stop the loading bar. So this is kind of like an example of things that you can like liberate your controllers. On the left is like a controller where you have all your logic in your controller, and it's like it's like ugly, and then if you want to call the request somewhere else, then you have to add all the defaults and check for everything again. But if you put that logic into the services, then and on the transforms, then you can reuse it everywhere, and it's a lot easier. Same thing on a response. It's very common that you have to like check like that everything is not undefined and stuff like that before using it. But if you have like good transform and your responses, then you can make sure that when the data gets to the controller, it is ready to be used, whatever. That's it. But check out transforms. They're pretty cool.
All right, Rob's confident. Rob's going to present his first, so he gets bonus points.
So I decided to use the much maligned but now very awesome Angular router to build the B application. Clap for the router. So let's see. Got a very simple app here.
Is Sam allowed?
No, he's not. He's cheating at this point, but that's okay. So we've got a very simple Angular component. We're just calling it demo app. I forgot to change the name of that to Bcyclopedia. Got a nice little template here and a router link, right? So we've got a link, and then we're just saying I want to render my actual B content in here. And then I'm using the router, obviously, so I've got my router directives. And then I've got some providers, so I've got a nice little service because we like dependency injection and testability and being able to do these things, right?
Is your app testable, Sam?
Yeah, well. So I've got a service to go fetch my B data, which Sam is currently filling in madly. So there you go. We're also using the HTTP service in Angular, but we're not actually because I didn't have any data, so we can ignore that. And then I'm using the router, so I'm just setting up, okay, I've got a default path, and I want it to go to the bees thing. And then I've got a path component that shows me a list of bees, and then I've got a component and a route that shows me a bee by name. Right? And then I've got a couple of simple components here. I've got a bee detail by Visual Studios. And it's very simple, right? It's just got the bee's name because we ran out of information, and we go and fetch that bee data. And then I've got a very simple little list here that renders, obviously, a list of bees and links to the what? I couldn't find any data on these for bees. There was no API, like there was no bdata.json that I could use. So yeah, somebody needs to start that startup though. That would be useful. And then so I've got a router link, and I'm just using the bee's name to make that part of my link, right? And then rendering my b.name. And then I'm saying here, I just want to load the bees from our fake API using our bee service. And I'm using the async pipe as you do, right? So this returns an observable of bees or lists of bees, and we're assigning that, and then I can go to the async pipe. And yeah, oh, so let's look at the bee service just real quick here. So my B service, so simple little B data. I've got HTTP injected here because I thought I was going to be clever and find, as I said, a B API thing, and I couldn't find one. So I'm just returning a mock list of bees here, and then I have the same mock list of bees, and then finding one of those bees by name. When I'm in my detail, I can say, right, I have my params here, and I can get the param coming off of the router and use that to go fetch my bee by name. Which means, Sam, that I could send a link on Snapchat to the bee that I'm looking at. Will I be able to do that? I'm not sure. So then we look at our list of bees. Hey, we've got honeybees, wasps, and hornets. And then I can say, look, I've got a wasp. And look, it's in the URL. That's the app. Don't be fooled by Sam's pretty graphics. Just keep that in mind. Yeah.
So I made a little app. It's HTML, and I have an index.js file. I'm using the center tag. You may have heard of it. Introduced in HTML 3.2. Well, no, maybe before, but it's awesome. Okay, so let's look at my app. Whoa, right? What is going on? Angular doesn't have this. Angular does not have this. Oh wait, is that a text shadow? What? Crazy. So I got a list of some bees. Got the good Pokemon bee. We can even, oh God. Well, it expands. See, we got some bee info. It's there. You can toggle other ones. It works. So how did I make this? Let's see. Yeah, we can read this. So I have my B-list data provider, also known as an array. Exactly, innovative. I have a query selector here. It's how you get an element on the page, sort of like jQuery. I have add event listener. It's sort of like a on click. You have the banana in the box, or is it just the banana? I don't have a banana, just have add event listener. So I wrote a version of event delegation in like 7 lines of code. And so I register one event listener on the body. And so if you click on any element, the event bubbles all the way up to the top. And then I look at what event dispatched it. And in my case, I'm looking just for the B list item. So basically it does one registration. I could like listen for any element that does a click. Basically what jQuery does, and if you ever use Backbone, it sort of does the same thing with .on. It's cool because every node that you add, you don't have to re-register. It's great. I have a fancy B-list template, sort of like Angular, except for mine's just JavaScript. Regular, uses a string literal, do some template interpolation. It works. I have a function that toggles some stuff, and a good for loop where I append my B templates into everything. And I was going to write a filter, but we had to stop. So that is my B app. Bees are the best. Does the search work? No. Keep that in mind. All right. Well, it's 54 lines of code. So, network. Womp. Bees. My JavaScript is 1.6 kilobytes. Well, that's it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Rob and Sam. And now the moment of truth. If you think Rob's app won, give a round of applause. Okay, that's about here on the applause meter. All right, if you think Sam's app won, give a round of applause. All right, vanilla JavaScript wins the day. We've got some work to do on Angular. Okay. All right, we're going to ask our speakers to come up now and answer questions, as well as anyone from Angular team who wants to come up. And we've got folks from Ionic visiting us, so maybe 1 or 2 of you or 3 of you want to come up here, and if you've got any Ionic questions, they will answer them.
So, Scott, I'm just curious about, in terms of testing Angular components, are you testing with shallow, or what's your method for testing components? You know, how many levels down? And also, do you spend a lot of time testing the views, or do you try to stick to keeping the models, good coverage on the models?
Got it. Okay, sorry about that.
Good question. So I specifically just test isolated components. I don't really dig down into like testing a component that's inside of another component that's inside of another component. I'll just go grab the one that I want and test that, because then you just start getting into more like end-to-end testing. So I'm more focused on unit testing the components, specifically isolated. And then what was the other question?
In terms of, thank you. I was like, that's good. I mean, the views depend. Like, for example, in your
Oh, the
development
views.
phase, yeah,
Right.
testing
Okay.
models
Yeah.
versus which coverage.
So there's no secret that we can do a little bit of JavaScript inside of our Angular templates. So when that happens, I do test the views, like binding to ng model or properties and stuff like that. When I can test them, especially if it's like a stateless component that's taking an input, I want to test that stuff. But if I'm not doing a lot of expressions or binding in the template, I'm not really testing it. Although you could, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from like testing that stuff if you want. You could be really strict and write a regex expectation to make sure the template is exactly the same thing you wrote if you wanted to, but that'd be really crazy. But no, only if there's JavaScript in there.
What is the status of offline compilation?
It's done, and everyone can go home. And Rob, I guess Rob can give a summary.
So offline compilation is functional. It works. It does really amazing things. But at the moment, it is.
Do you want to say what offline compilation is?
Yeah. So in Angular 2, we have the ability to. So in Angular 1, when you wrote a template, we would bring that template in as is, and then we would parse it, and we would turn it into instructions for rendering, basically. So that happens in Angular 1 at runtime, like when the application starts up. In Angular 2, we take them and we can do that as a build task. So we can run your templates through our little compiler thing and turns them into code. And then you don't have to ship the code that actually compiles those templates. You don't have to waste the time compiling those templates. So the net result is it makes your apps much smaller and much, much faster. So it works. It's really pretty amazing, but it's kind of a pain to use right now. So one of the things we've been working on and kind of what we're waiting on for RC5 is to make sure that we have a good kind of end-to-end story for how do you assemble an application? How do you get all your stuff in the right place so that compilation works, right? So that will be, as far as I know, that will release in RC5 and should be the last thing we need to do before we can ship 2.0.0. That's the status.
This close? We're just waiting on the Tobiler to finish something.
Yes, it's the Tobiler is what we're waiting on.
Oh, now we've got questions.
See, now the questions are coming.
Hi, I have a question for the Ionic team. So right now I'm using Ionic 2 and I find it pretty cool, but I have a problem right now is that because I want to use the push notification in Ionic 2, but I search in the community and it says it's not ready yet and it's coming soon. So I was wondering if there's any update with that feature. Thank you.
I'm probably the last person to ask that, actually. So I'm focused largely on the framework itself. But that's so you're saying with Ionic Native, you're looking through there, what is possible. Actually, Jeff, can you answer more of that about how the service workers were, or what Alex
Are we talking about browser push notifications or native push
Actually, yeah, that's a
notifications?
good question. Was it?
Which flavor of Ionic are you using?
Oh, right.
The one that runs in it.
Are you talking about web push notifications or
iOS?
Okay, so
Okay. So our platform services and how you want to use those along with Ionic 2. So we've got the framework itself, like the SDK, that's the open source, what's on GitHub, and then we've got Ionic, the company, provides different push notifications. Is that the side of things you're talking about? The push notifications of? Okay. I actually don't have a good answer for that right now. But yeah, they're working on it. I know it's in beta right now, and we can probably talk offline more about it and get you in contact with the right people to get that figured out.
Okay.
So speaking of service workers per se, in terms of offline compilation in a way, have you guys or is it possible to compile like an entire Angular app in a service worker, at least parts of it, and serve that up? Is that something that is coming or something that the Angular team has thought about? Or
Is Alex here?
So you're asking about compiling in a service worker?
So yeah, like running it in running the compiler service inside the service worker, so you can then. So the answer is yes. In theory, you could totally do it. We're probably not going to do it because I don't think for us there's a huge amount of practical benefit to it for a shippable app. But like you could completely do it if you wanted to.
Yeah, in terms of running an app in a worker, we're not really focusing on it, but we are focusing on other things like push notifications and different caching strategies with service worker. And we've already built some stuff as part of Mobile Toolkit. If you go to mobile.angular.io, that we've integrated with CLI for caching and stuff like that. But yeah, we have web worker support. That's also another thing that you could use that same stuff to run in a service worker. I don't think there's anything that would prevent that, but not really a use case we focus much on.
Was it so like, and I've seen, so there's totally experimental stuff up out there. I've seen somebody trying to run Angular Universal in a service worker, right? Like that kind of stuff. Doable, totally doable. We're just not going to probably support it as a core team thing.
Yeah, Minko Getchev had a proof of concept where he was doing that, running Universal in a service worker somewhere on GitHub.
Tracy?
So Patrick and Scott, I know you guys were working really hard on something a few weeks ago, some amazing videos. I just wanted to know where y'all are with that because I would like to watch them and what they're about. I don't think everybody knows.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, so me and Patrick, we're working on 2 courses actually for our company, Angular Class, angularclass.com. You can check it out. Actually, the website's old. I need to launch the new one. But anyway, for the last couple, actually for a month now, me and Patrick have been working on one course for modern JavaScript. So taking you from absolutely using script tags and jQuery to now, how to get there, everything from Node, TypeScript, ES6, modules, all that stuff. Webpack, all that amazing stuff. And then we also have another course teaching you the basics of Angular 2 while rebuilding an app. So we put tons of hours into recording this stuff. We're going to release them probably next week entirely for free. So, yeah. Yeah, so just stay tuned to our website, angularclass.com. We'll be launching the new site hopefully this weekend. We're so swamped with getting these courses out. But yeah, they'll be there. So
we'll try not to deprecate everything this week.
Also, I heard that 3 weeks ago, Patrick was like, yeah, I'm going to release it tomorrow. Release it tomorrow.
No, we're totally there for next week. We're on track. I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning recording videos. So we're getting it done. We're just about there. Yeah. If it wasn't for, some of the stuff that's been coming out for offline compilation in Angular 2, we probably would have been there. But, we're just trying to keep up. It's hard. We did. We had to pre-deprecate. We had to go in and, put the pre-deprecated label watermark on the video so you can see it. But leave it there. Yeah.
So what's happening with JSPM? And yeah.
I love talking about JS.
Oh, yeah. Here you go, Ron. You got the mic over there.
So what do you mean? I guess the first part of that question.
So what I was hearing is that, as Angular 2, was growing in popularity, that there was a push to use Angular 2 with JSPM, but I've used it so far with Webpack, and I haven't, though in most of the implementations I've seen, have still been using Webpack. So I'm curious if there's some, recommendation on that, or what direction is the Angular team recommending?
So it's hard for us to make a recommendation because A, it's JavaScript and it changes every 3 months, right? Like there's a new tool every 3 months. JSPM specifically. So there's kind of 2 parts to JSPM, right? There's System.js, which we use in all of our documentation. And I think we're big fans of System.js as a project. I think that kind of that's where the web is going, if you like loading modules and all these sorts of things. It is though, there's no secret though, that it is difficult to configure. It's something that if you don't know exactly how it works, then it can be quite difficult to use. So, the counter argument that is Webpack is very, very straightforward to use once you have it up and running, but there is obviously the Webpack config thing that you've got to learn, right? So there's overhead in whatever case. We are, and I guess I can probably pre-announce this here.
Do it.
Yeah, do it. So we're actually switching the. Is this okay, Hans? You yelled at me the last time I did this. Can I talk about this?
He's playing Pokemon Go.
I know. Can I talk about the CLI and where we're going and what it's doing? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Do it.
So. I don't know. So one of the things we're in the process of doing right now is we are actually switching the CLI, Angular CLI, over to Webpack. And that's because the CLI I think is designed to be sort of an end-to-end solution. So you shouldn't really know that you're using Webpack, but we do want to make it easy to use, easy to configure, get all the good stuff that you get that, the Webpack ecosystem is already built. They've got a plugin for literally anything you want to do. So the CLI will use Webpack probably at some point in the very near future. And that's not a sort of an endorsement of Webpack any more than like, we just think that it's a good tool to go into our CLI. We want to be very clear though, that you should be able to use Angular with any modern build tooling that exists. And so we work very closely with Guy Bedford, who runs JSPM and System.js. You know, and if there's another tool 3 months from now, then we want to make sure that we support that as well. So, and it's, to me, it's like, do you like using gulp or grunt, right? Like people have religious wars about gulp and grunt, and it's the same thing with System and Webpack, and it'll be the same thing for the next 2 tools, right? So our advice would be make sure you understand what modules are about, and hey, somebody's got a course coming out about modules, right? So watch that course and understand what modules are, why we have them, how they get loaded, and then I think using tooling is a lot easier to learn, right?
Oh.
Which is like a totally non-answer to your question of which one should I use, but sorry, that's what it goes.
Yeah, let me add something. So like the creator of System.js or JSPM, he's also working with the creator of Webpack, and we're working to make sure there's interoperability between the two. So again, in the future, there will, you know, you don't have to choose one over the other. You'll be able to use both at the same time eventually.
Questions?
Tracy.
So, Brandy.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
Why? I have great questions. So, I know we last talked about Ionic 2 stuff, and I just wanted to have an update of like what you guys are doing with Ionic 2 and what's going on. Scott wants to know too.
Yeah, I wanted to know too.
Okay, well, we're currently working on beta 11, right? And we were planning on that being our release candidate, but
Sorry.
however, some things have changed. And then, and so we're pretty much working with Angular, and that's why we came here this week to implement the changes so that we can get beta 11 out and hopefully a release candidate.
Is there anything
wanna add
positive
stuff.
you want to say about it?
Yeah, Angular's been great to work with overall. We're very happy with them.
And Ionic 2 is going to be awesome.
And Ionic 2 is already awesome, yeah.
Yeah, to follow that up, so basically Ionic 2 itself, the framework, everything about it, the API that we have right now, we're very happy with it. We'd love to call it a release candidate. We'd love to get it out there the second, but the underlying way that it gets bootstrapped and how the offline compiling stuff can work.
Offline compiling.
I'm not going to explain how it's going to work because nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
But anyways, what I'm getting at is that where it's at, the code, the source code itself, and how you write an Ionic 2 app, like that's kind of where we want to be at. The API is right there. The problem is that the tooling has to catch up to it, and that's a large part of why we're out here right now, is working with the team to get that figured out. But what you're writing today, so like any Ionic 2 apps that you're building already, it's kind of already done. It's just the tooling kind of has to catch up to it to make sure that the file sizes are a lot smaller, so that it's the startup times are a lot faster. And again, it's not the framework itself, it's not Angular 2 itself that's broke. It's just the tooling, which is what needs to get fixed right now. So that's kind of where it's at. But in the end, we're really happy with where it's at, and it's great at building Windows, even Windows platform, iOS, Android platform with all the same code base, using all the niceties of Angular 2. So yeah, we're really happy with it. That helps answer it in a more positive spin.
Can I ask a question about the Windows side of that? What's the story on the Windows thing? Because Ionic for me has always been iOS, Android. What's the...
Well, there really isn't, I mean, when it comes right down to it, it's just different CSS. I mean, it's still an application that has buttons. Just Windows platform has a different look. And the same thing with Interior Design and with iOS. It's still an application that has buttons and it has tabs and it navigates to a different page. They'll just have a different design. And so that's kind of a big part of Ionic 2, is that we make sure that it gives you the great defaults for what the users are familiar with and what's the person who's using that phone, what they're accustomed to on that phone. From there, then you can add all your own flair. And so a lot of the work of what Brandy's done and a lot of the stuff that we're really focused on is making sure that the app itself and I guess the brand that you're building is entirely customizable. So you can quickly get just great defaults, everything, great colors, great buttons, everything that fits for that platform. But then just with a couple lines of code, the entire design can be for your brand. And that's a large part of Ionic 2, is to make sure that it's customizable. And so that we don't have a bunch of Ionic looking apps, but rather a lot of people are building apps with Ionic. So.
Is there a release schedule date for Angular 2 coming up?
No, the last thing we're working on is this app module, the way we are organizing apps, and working on that to get RC5 out the door. That's the last blocker. If RC5 is good, maybe a little bit of cleanup, and then we want to graduate it to 2.0. But we want to really make sure we want to validate things, make sure everything's nice and stable before we call it final. Ben Lesh?
Are you going to release Angular 2.0 with a... Sorry. Thank you. My name is Ben Lesh. Are you going to release Angular 2.0 with a beta dependency that is RxJS5?
I don't know. Do you know anybody who knows what might be the status on that? Do you know anybody?
There's one guy that knows about that, and he keeps telling me he needs a little help. So just wondering.
Okay.
So you're blocked by Rob Wormald. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, Rob, come on.
I think I have a pending PR actually against our
Merge is PR.
That's been pre-deprecated actually.
All right, we'll take this offline. I'll mediate this for you guys. Okay. Anyone else? We may ship with the beta dependency to answer your question. Anyone else?